Firstly, hi, I'm Bill. I'm the admin instructor here on Alt-Roll. If you don't know me, now you do. And today I'd like to talk about the OGL debacle. As I kind of alluded to before, the way I'm going to start this off is I'm going to go through an entire history of all the context that someone who doesn't know anything about the OGL might need. I'm going to start talking about, what the OGL is, when it was rolled out, and starting back in the early 2000s. Then I'll go ahead and fast forward to kind of everything that led up to the events of the last 2 weeks with Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro, and D&D and D&D Beyond. Kind of everything that we could find. I'll make sure to give as much context as needed, but if you do have questions, comments, or concerns along the way, feel free to voice them in the OGL text chat. That's the one I'll be looking for if you're confused, if you need me to explain something a little further, if you need me to double back on something, that's where you can kind of type it out. You can type it out in that chat. I will do my best to read your name out loud and then read your question, comment, or concern. But if you would rather ask your question anonymously, you don't want your name read out loud, you can feel free to private message me. Typically, if you click on my name, which it might not do it in the stage, you might have to find me, but you can send me a private message for your question. And you can do so. I will read it out loud anonymously and then do my best to answer it. So if you're a little nervous, you feel like your question might be stupid, which no questions are stupid, you can send it to me privately. I'll read it out loud and do my best to answer it, but no worries about that. And yes, thank you, Crypt, for answering that. If the music is too loud, you will need to manually right-click on Hydra and lower its user volume yourself. Unfortunately, the power for us to control the volume is locked behind a premium subscription, so unfortunately, we don't really have that available. So with all of that, you know who I am, you know what we're here to talk about today, and you know how to communicate during this whole discussion. After I kind of lay everything out in terms of the timeline and everything that has happened, I'm going to make sure to go into how this affects us, how this affects our community, Alt-Roll, D&D in general, players, DMs, etc. I'll try to give any added context there as well, to kind of cut through a lot of the frustration that people are feeling, to give you all the facts as they are presented. And then from there, we will open up to discuss. People will be free to voice their opinions for or against. I will ask that everybody keep their opinions relatively safe for work. We don't want to foster any sort of hate or brigading here. And we certainly don't want anyone to feel unwelcome in the community or just generally in D&D, just because Wizards of the Coast is doing some messed up stuff. So with all those little caveats out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. In the beginning, there was nothing. No, I'm kidding. In the beginning, let's roll the clocks back to the early 2000s. In the early 2000s, Wizards of the Coast unveiled their original Open Gaming License, abbreviated OGL, along with the initial release of 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons. Now, the OGL allows people to use and reproduce the core rules found in the system's reference document for their own homebrew content, essentially allowing people to freely use D&D terms and rules and mechanics within their works to create homebrew content that was compatible with the current edition of D&D, that being 3rd edition. Now, this is a little bit of an oversimplification, but really not much. The original OGL could be condensed onto a single page based on, the font and kind of spacing and everything. It was very, very short, very small, and it allowed a great amount of freedom for independent creators and third-party publishers to modify, create, and release their own content for D&D. Now, the general mindset behind this was that Wizards wanted to focus on releasing their core rulebooks. However, people wanted more content. There was huge demand and not enough supply. It took a long time to put together the books, get artwork, get everything kind of play-tested, and get everything out there. So, the OGL allowed the community to fill that gap. And all these community creations still required the core rule books to be able to play correctly. So you still had to buy the 3rd edition player's handbook to play the homebrew books that people were putting out under the OGL. So in essence, it was a win-win-win for everybody. Players got more content, third-party creators got to create and sell content, and Wizards of the Coast got free publicity and more sales of their core rulebooks as people wanted to play the OGL licensed content. So this was the initial release of the OGL. Generally very well received. It was very popular, and it did help expand a lot of the content that was available. And I'll mention some names that some of you might have heard of a little bit later as well. So that gets released in the early 2000s. Now, in 2008, Wizards of the Coast transitioned from 3rd edition or 3.5 to release 4th edition of D&D. Now, 4th edition, among other gameplay changes that people did not really like, attempted to use a new gaming license, not the OGL, which was much more restrictive. Now, along with the gameplay changes, the new gaming license being more restrictive caused many people to stop playing 4th edition and either go back to 3rd edition or transition to some of the other newly created systems, such as the original Pathfinder game system, which was made by former Wizards of the Coast staff using 3rd edition as a baseline for it. So 4th edition came out, they tried to change the OGL or release a new OGL, which was more restrictive than the original. It failed. People didn't transition to the new system. They didn't like 4th edition that much. People didn't really play it. Again, gross oversimplification of all the 4th edition debacle. There were other things that led to that system kind of faltering a bit. But overall, that's the general gist of it. Now, out of all of this, it seems that Wizards learned their lesson, because when 5th edition released, it reintroduced the old OGL, included with its own 5th edition system reference document. So they used OGL version 1.0, and there was a 5th edition system reference document for third-party creators and independent homebrewers to create content for 5th edition D&D. So this all happened in 2008. This is the backstory, the lore, if you will. So with that all established, let's fast forward back to the present day. Not really the present day. We're going to skip back a year. In February of 2022, which will seem like forever ago, almost a year ago from today, there was essentially a shareholder in the Hasbro Corporation called Alta Fox Capital Management. Alta Fox Capital Management is an investor and shareholder in Hasbro, and they sent out a letter to the other shareholders seeking to replace the board of directors due to Hasbro's lack of initiative in monetizing D&D. Now, at this point, I need to establish some other things. Firstly, Hasbro, the gaming company, owns Wizards of the Coast. They also own other IPs such as Magic the Gathering. Now, many of these shareholders were, at this point, generally perceived to be under the assumption that most of Hasbro's money came from toys and traditional board games, the traditional Hasbro IPs that you know of. However, Alta Fox Capital Management made it obvious that due to the growth of Dungeons & Dragons and Magic the Gathering, that Hasbro was, or could have been, making a lot of money off of these IPs. Essentially, Hasbro was not monetizing D&D enough. Now, if you're a Magic the Gathering fan, you will know that Hasbro did make a lot of monetization changes in recent years to that hobby, which is why many of them can empathize and sympathize with a lot of the D&D fans right now. So Alta Fox Capital Management puts out this scathing presentation saying that, the board is not doing enough, they're wasting the shareholders' money, etc. Now, the initiative to replace the board of directors failed, but that did kick the board into essentially trying to appease the shareholders so that they don't try this again. It really kicked them into gear. Now, that same month, Wizards of the Coast had promoted new executives to big positions in the company. Most notably, Cynthia Williams was promoted to president of Wizards of the Coast and their digital games division, coming over from Microsoft's gaming ecosystem commercial team with Xbox. Now, this comes after Chris Cox was appointed CEO of Hasbro in January, who formerly led Wizards of the Coast digital gaming division. So the former leader of the D&D digital gaming division became the CEO of Hasbro, and a former Xbox digital gaming executive was brought over to lead the team in his stead. So there were big transitions in Hasbro and in Wizards of the Coast on the executive team, and they were under a lot of pressure from, for all intents and purposes, this one specific shareholder, but they were feeling the pressure to begin monetizing Dungeons & Dragons more, make more money off of it. So that was in February of 2022. That following May of 2022 began a series of things that many of us probably heard about but did not really piece together were connected. In May, Wizards of the Coast acquired D&D Beyond, one of the biggest digital distributors of D&D sourcebooks and modules. In July of 2022, Hasbro held a large Twitch stream unveiling new product launches for D&D and Magic the Gathering. So Wizards of the Coast had a big Twitch stream. Many of you might have tuned in. I certainly did, kind of tweeting out and putting out a bunch of new launches. This is where Wizards of the Coast unveiled the One D&D playtest, the fact that they are working on a new D&D Beyond virtual tabletop, and a list of all the new modules that are going to be released every quarter, starting with Dragonlance in the fall and winter of 2022. So starting with the release of Dragonlance, there was going to be at least one new module released every fiscal quarter. So this was kind of a big showcase of, hey, we're working on stuff. Here's all the stuff we're doing. And as D&D consumers, I'm sure many of us were very excited at this unveiling. I know I was. After that, we're fast forwarding even more to December of 2022. During an investor call in December, Wizards of the Coast stated that D&D is a, quote, under-monetized brand, stating that the platform was built to undersell to its audience and that the majority of the books are meant to be purchased by dungeon masters who only make up 20% of the D&D audience. This is the first mention in recent memory that Wizards wanted to create what they called a recurrent spending environment, aka a subscription service. Recurrent spending simply means you are paying for something over and over again. Could be things like subscriptions, could be things like season passes, things like that. Now, when this came out, there was some alarm generated in the D&D community, as many people remember the disaster that was 4th edition, where Wizards tried to do this very same thing to monetize D&D. So as I said before, they attempted to switch over to a more restrictive gaming license. They released the core rulebooks in 3 parts that released at different times, and a bunch of other weird decisions that caused people to either stay with 3rd edition or switch to Pathfinder. However, despite this alarm, the community wasn't really super concerned yet, as Wizards hadn't put out any official statements. This was just from a investor call, essentially. So they hadn't put out anything official, so some people were worried, but most people were still kind of like, okay, let's see what happens. You know, we don't know what they're going to do yet. We move now to this month, January of 2023. Now, starting on January 5th, which is just under 2 weeks ago now, a journalist for IO9, Linda Codega, leaked that Wizards of the Coast had changed their open gaming license and was sending it out to content creators and publishers under non-disclosure agreements to sign onto it. Now, when this was leaked, many people immediately saw that the changes to the OGL were numerous, but the most egregious were the following. First, third-party creators under the OGL 1.1, as it was dubbed, now had to report their earnings to Wizards of the Coast. Creators who make over $750,000 also had to pay royalties on any dollar amount over $750,000. Now, these royalties were normally listed at 25%, but if the project was funded on Kickstarter, you only had to pay a 20% royalty. That was the first major change. The second major change was that certain legal wording gave Wizards of the Coast a non-exclusive, perpetual, irrevocable license to use content created under the OGL for any purpose they see fit. Other wording also stated that Wizards could revoke your license under the OGL at any time if they didn't like what you were creating, though this was explained in the document itself as a way to prevent hateful third-party creations that would damage the D&D brand, such as things featuring transphobia, hate speech, racism, etc. The OGL changes also stated if your work causes legal trouble for Wizards of the Coast, you would be liable for all of their legal fees. And finally, and most importantly, the leaked OGL 1.1 stated that any agreements or creations under the OGL 1.0 would be considered null and void, essentially revoking the old OGL, which was granted, quote, in perpetuity for creations like Pathfinder, Kobold Press, and many other third-party creators. So a lot of different changes happened and people digested this fairly quickly. Now, while this was a leak, this leak was confirmed by the CEO of Kickstarter on Twitter, stating that he had negotiated down the better royalty rate for users who use Kickstarter instead of other fundraising platforms. Now, it was also alleged that the OGL 1.1 documents were accompanying contracts being sent to D&D partners. However, I do need to note here that this was only ever confirmed as hearsay. From everything I was able to gather, the actual contracts that these were supposedly attached to were not leaked. Presumably, leakers not wanting to out their sources and expose them to the wrath of a violated non-disclosure agreement never leaked any of the contracts themselves that the OGL was allegedly attached to. I only mention this because we do need to establish what we know as fact versus what we're being told by leakers. This statement that the OGL 1.1 was attached to contracts for partners to sign was confirmed by several of the different leakers, credible leakers in the community who ended up being right about a lot of other things that Wizards of the Coast was doing. But again, this is all technically hearsay. So when this leaked, this generated outrage among the D&D community. Obviously, who wouldn't be upset at this? Essentially, Wizards was threatening to revoke their old license that created a lot of the homebrew that people loved, simply because Wizards was not getting any of the revenue generated by that third-party content. So posts started going up on Twitter and Reddit with outrage at Hasbro's money-grubbing tactics. However, there were still some users who came to Wizards' defense, stating that these were all leaks, none of this was confirmed, we need to wait for Wizards to put out an official statement before we come to any conclusions. So this was the initial leak on IO9. Is everybody with me so far? I want to take a moment to pause, take a drink of water, and double check the chat to make sure people aren't asking questions that I'm missing here. So if you have a question, feel free to type it in the chat, or you can send it to me personally before I move on, and it continues to get worse. Yeah, Orion77 says, being the Elder Scrolls Online player, the new OGL looks like all the microtransactions that they are forcing upon the players. Yes, so one of the reasons in the backstory, which I'll explain in greater detail later, that I mentioned that the new digital game division vice president was from Microsoft, is kind of to piece those things together. That yes, subscription services are kind of that mindset that's being brought over. Everyone is trying to force subscription down our throats now. Microsoft, Apple, Google, on and on, just for basic services. Exactly. Recurrent spending is profitable. I just don't understand how in such a big company, no one said people are going to hate this and tank our sales. Again, we can discuss this later because I find it interesting. There's essentially an economic theory out there that says if you keep your prices low, you hit the largest audience. But if you raise your prices incrementally, your audience gets smaller, but your profits actually increase due to the higher rates. So even though you're selling to less people, the higher rate gives you more profits. So many companies use this method to determine that, hey, if we increase the price of a video game from $60 to $70, 10% less people will buy our product, but we'll make millions more in revenue from the extra $10 per copy. So it's literally a trade-off of appealing to less people for easier prices, but making more money due to the price change. And again, I'm not an economist. I've just heard about that a lot. It's been a growing trend in many different industries, but I thought I'd mention it since it seems topical. Exactly, yeah. There's a lot of stuff that people are transitioning from one-time payments to subscriptions, and it seems like that may be the direction. However, again, nothing is confirmed up to this point. All good things to be kind of considering. A lot of this conversation is very good and generating good kind of things to be thinking about. So let's keep going because, as I said, it does get worse. So that was on January 5th. So January 5th happened. All that stuff came out, and we were all like, as I said before, you know, the people are like, okay, just wait for Wizards to put something out. I'm sure they can explain this. People said maybe it's a draft, maybe it's this. People were defending Wizards still. So the following week after, what came out was nothing. There was about a week of silence. Wizards did not put out any official statements other than one tweet from the D&D Beyond Twitter account on January 10th, stating, quote, "We know you have questions about the OGL, and we will be sharing more soon. Thank you for your patience." So this silence made people even madder because many got concerned that the reason they weren't saying anything was because the leaks were true and that Wizards was trying to just kind of weather the outrage and continue to push out this OGL 1.1 just kind of to sneak it past the community. So they put out almost nothing. Go girl, give us nothing. We love it. D&D Beyond sent out that one tweet. They got roasted in the comments, especially by many D&D content creators. I know if you follow Ginny D on Twitter, or even if you don't follow her, she's great. She's been roasting them in the Twitter replies for the last couple weeks. So that was the week after. We really didn't get anything, and people were kind of waiting on bated breath. Kind of the rage continued to build. People had this leaked document. At this point, it began to hit major news. This is when channels like Asmongold, who has hundreds of thousands of subscribers, but typically covers MMO content, covered the Wizards of the Coast drama on stream and also posted the clip of it to his YouTube channel. Penguin Zero, also known as Charlie, also began covering it around this time, kind of covering the general reaction to it and basically stating, yeah, this is dumb. So while I don't want to say mainstream media was covering it, media sources outside of the tabletop role-playing game scene were covering this drama, going through everything that was happening, and it was getting some pretty major traction. So all that comes to a head last Thursday, January 12th. D&D Shorts, a prominent D&D YouTuber, tweeted out a screenshot of an email he'd received from a Wizards of the Coast employee, who he confirmed did actually work for the site in a separate, non-published email. Now, because I have this pulled up on the tab, I'm actually going to paste this image into the chat here. So you can click on that, and that is essentially the image that D&D Shorts tweeted out. So you can see for yourself, this is a rather scathing email. So this screenshot stated that Wizards was indeed trying to weather the outrage and continue to push out the OGL 1.1. It also asserted that all they care about is their bottom line, that executives view D&D players as an obstacle between Hasbro and the people's money, and that the only metric that they cared about are D&D Beyond subscriptions. This post was the tipping point. The Twitter post immediately started going viral. It got cross-posted onto the D&D subreddit, where it actually hit the front page of Reddit. People across the community started immediately canceling their D&D Beyond subscriptions in droves, including high-profile users like Ginny D. Now, there are no exact numbers for how many people canceled, but it is speculated to be somewhere in the thousands. And given that there were many different subscription models, some people were stating they were canceling the $100 subscription, some people were just canceling the $15 subscription. Whatever people may have been doing, speculation of how many people canceled is upwards of the thousands, which, doing that math just very quickly, is a lot of money. It's more money than I will probably see in a long time. And Wizards of the Coast, and well, D&D Beyond, lost a lot of that. So that is where things came to a head. Things got very, very angry. People were very upset. As I said, this was the boiling point. And the cancellations came in droves. Many other posts on the D&D subreddit and on Twitter were encouraging people to cancel their subscriptions. People were calling for a boycott of D&D, things like that. Now, that same day, Paizo, the creators of Pathfinder, announced that they would be creating their own gaming license, the Open RPG Creative License, abbreviated ORC. This would separate Pathfinder and other third-party creations from Wizards of the Coast, and instead would be under an open source gaming license owned by a law firm appointed to be its legal custodian. So the ORC license would not be owned by Paizo. It would be owned by a legal firm, which is its legal custodian to enforce it, but no singular company owns the license. So this came out a couple hours after a video response was slated to be revealed, according to leaks. Around 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, there was supposed to be a video released by Wizards addressing the OGL stuff. That never came. And then at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard, Paizo released their announcement, which immediately caused more people to state that they would be switching from D&D to Pathfinder to support Paizo and other third-party creators under the new gaming license. So Paizo literally said, we're going to make our own gaming license. This is on top of the fact that I believe they and Kobold Press are also releasing their own tabletop systems. I'm not super familiar with that, so if someone in the chat knows more about that, you can feel free to kind of correct me with more details there. But yeah, generally speaking, a lot of people, especially people who would be directly affected by these changes, were moving to their own license. Now, this license is in progress. They said they are in the act of creating it. They are gathering feedback from partners they want to sign on to it, including Kobold Press and many, many others. So it is not finalized yet, but they are creating it currently. So that was Thursday. Let me double check the chat because the chat kind of popped off a little bit. American Alex Boy says, if I don't have a subscription but just an account, would that do anything? I'll talk about that towards the end because that is something people have been stating. I want to give people full context for if you have an account versus a subscription, what should you do? I'll get into that towards the end when we talk about kind of the effects this has on the community. Dragons and Dungeons. Yeah, welcome to our new tabletop gaming system, Dragon and Dungeons, where the dragons don't make sense and the points don't matter. I don't know. So yeah, so that was Thursday. Now, the final point in this timeline of this whole debacle is Friday, January 13th. Now, at this point, the damage had been done. This is the day after the email leak from the Wizards of the Coast employee, and everything has happened. On Friday, D&D Beyond put out a post on their forum trying to walk back a lot of the leaked OGL 1.1 content. However, many people openly do not believe the assertions they make there and believe it's just PR doing damage control. Now, in this statement, Wizards of the Coast tried to state their intent behind the changes, saying that they wanted to prevent hateful or discriminatory products from being made, prevent D&D content from being used in NFT or blockchain projects, and that the OGL is for the content creator and homebrewer, not major corporations. They also claimed OGL 1.1 was only a draft, and that they intended to gather feedback on it before releasing it. They also stated the new OGL will not contain any royalties, they will correct language to not be able to claim anyone's content as their own, and that the new OGL 2.0 will not be available for a while as they are still making these changes, but it is coming. Now, this post did not win back much favor from the community. The response to this was largely still anger. And the language used felt very patronizing to some and too little too late for many others. We have not seen any of this new OGL language or the new documents they may be attached to, and so this is where we stand up to this moment. So that is a complete timeline of all the context you need, as well as everything that's happened in the last couple weeks with regards to D&D, Wizards of the Coast, the open gaming license, and things of that nature. So how are we doing so far? How's everybody doing in the chat? How are we feeling? What's going on? I can tell you how I feel, but I don't want to overly bias people with my own opinions because, you know, I'm the person talking. And yes, absolutely, please do not promote piracy on the server. That does violate our server rules. Let's see here. Conflicted, can't say how I feel about it. I feel like Hasbro killed the golden egg goose, set fire to their own flagship. Don't care for this OGL business. Yeah. This is largely the reaction that many other people had. You all are not alone in this weird feeling of loving the product but hating the creator. Certainly, it's a complex situation to feel about. Came this close to caving and buying the books, and now I won't. Well, we'll get into that as well. I do want to get into like what your options are as a player of D&D. If you enjoy D&D, you know, what are things that we can do? What are we as a community? You know, what is Alt-Roll doing? And kind of go into that next. But I just kind of want to give us a breather to let out any emotions we might be feeling, especially if you're hearing this for the first time. It shows they don't seem to care about players and people consuming their content. Yeah, that is really well put, Starstruck. It definitely feels anti-consumer in a way, which I think is what struck a lot of people's nerves. It's very much money for money's sake, not really about the community. And in several interviews that I didn't include in this recap, the original creator of the OGL, former Wizard of the Coast employee, I believe his name is Ryan Dancy, he came out and did several interviews talking about the mindset behind the original OGL. He believed that Dungeons and Dragons was for everyone, and the OGL was a step in giving that to everybody, and just kind of, not in so many words, coming out against a lot of these changes in his own way. If you're curious, I can try to find some of those live streams. Most of them were on YouTube, so they're actually not too difficult to find. But yeah. Is Wizards of the Coast the new J.K. Rowling, where the fans still love the product but are not too hot about the creator? Feels like it. Well, Aquast, I don't know. We'll get into that, because certainly I will say, with my own opinion here, D&D can live on without Wizards of the Coast, but Wizards of the Coast can't live on without D&D. But we'll get into that. They're gifting a fan base to other TTRPGs. Yeah, Dostoevsky, it certainly feels that way, especially to people in Pathfinder who've been waiting for a big surge of new players. They're all like, yes, finally. I even saw a post on the Pathfinder subreddit get pretty high on the main page of Reddit in talking about how many new people they're getting, new players they're getting. Kat mentions, yeah, but they are beholden to their shareholders, not the consumers, which is pretty much the heart of the problem. Exactly. Part of the reason why I wanted to give this context was because all of this kickstarted in February when a shareholder tried to oust the board of directors because D&D was not being monetized enough. Simply because Wizards did not really publicly put a lot of their information out there. They were very cards to the chest about how big D&D truly was and how much money it could potentially earn. Possibly because they knew something like this might happen if they got put in a pressured situation, but that's speculation on my part. CK76 asks, is there a formal means of voicing our concerns en masse, an organized petition or something going on? Yes, I will see if I can find some links to it. I know there is a petition created by Ryan Dancy, the creator of the original OGL, calling for Wizards of the Coast to not change it and just keep it the same for 1D&D. There are other methods that I'll talk about in just a bit for what we can do if you want to voice your support against these changes. Yes, Valdor posted the link there. That is the link to the open letter that I believe you can sign on to. Yeah. So let me pivot away from that and kind of talk about what this means for us. What does this mean for us as players? What does this mean for us as a community? What does this mean for potentially those among us who are also creators in systems? Those of you who might be working on your own third-party content. If you were working under the OGL, this affects you greatly. So let's dive into that. First up, as players of D&D, we remain largely unaffected by any of the OGL changes. These changes do not affect the core rulebooks or the modules that Wizards of the Coast releases. However, if you use third-party content, these changes will impact the amount of material you have available to choose from now and in the future. So as players, if you don't engage with third-party content at all, none of this affects you in the slightest. You can still continue to play D&D just as you normally would. Everything's unchanged from your aspect. Now, another important thing to mention, because a lot of people, when this came out, immediately said, well, what does Critical Role have to say about it? And they put out a statement a couple days ago, but ultimately they were largely silent through a lot of it. D&D live streams, videos, and podcasts are not covered by the OGL. They are covered by the fan content policy, which D&D has on their website, which, to my knowledge, up until today, January 16th, has remained unchanged. People will not stop making live streams or YouTube series directly due to the OGL change. Or they won't be forced to stop making this type of content. They might choose to on their own terms, but that is their decision. It's not being forced upon them. However, many of these groups also produce their own content under the OGL, such as Critical Role's Tal'Dorei book was produced under the Open Gaming license. So a lot of the people who do popular live streams, live plays, things like that, they also put out content to make revenue, and that content would be affected by the OGL changes. However, the actual live streams themselves, videos and podcasts, are covered under the fan content policy, which remains unchanged. As a community, D&D players and creators have come together en masse to oppose these changes, in the hopes of making sure Wizards doesn't try to do this a third time to independent and third-party creators. Fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice. As part of this community response, many players have decided to distance themselves from Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro in solidarity with the creators that would be affected by these changes. This includes canceling their D&D Beyond subscriptions, deleting their D&D Beyond accounts, boycotting the new D&D movie coming out this spring, selling Hasbro stock options that they have, and leaving the D&D system entirely to play other tabletop role-playing games like GURPS, Pathfinder, and others. We here on AltRoll support those of you who choose to oppose these changes however you see fit. If you would like to do something to show support of the old OGL and oppose the new 1.1 changes, the best thing you can do is to simply cancel any D&D Beyond subscriptions you may have. You still retain all the content you purchased up until your renewal date. And these numbers are the ones, according to the leaks, that Wizards of the Coast executives are looking at. You are under no obligation to do so if you don't personally want to. Neither I nor AltRoll is telling you to cancel your subscriptions. It is entirely your own choice. If you like using D&D Beyond, you are under no obligation to delete your account or cancel your subscriptions if you don't want to. Similarly, if you still want to play D&D 5th edition, you don't have to stop playing it. You're not a scab for continuing to play the game you love, even if the company behind it is doing some shady stuff at the moment. So that's the first thing. You don't have to do anything if you don't want to. That much should be clear, but I want to say it just in case. If you want to support, canceling your subscription seems like the simplest method to get their attention. It's what many people have already done, and that is the one that I would recommend pursuing. Anything other than that, like deleting your D&D Beyond account or completely not playing D&D ever again, is entirely a personal choice. It's whatever you want to do. And, that's it. As a server and community, AltRoll will still provide courses teaching and introducing new people to D&D 5th edition. We are not going to do away with all of our existing courses due to the OGL changes. Now, we are discussing internally whether we'd like to begin branching into other systems such as Pathfinder, but know that if you like D&D and you want to keep playing D&D, we have no plans to change the content that we provide currently. We will still be providing 5th edition D&D content on server. Now, as for other system stuff, certain members of staff are putting together a separate Mastermind course, similar to this one, to introduce curious members to the Pathfinder system. So as we get more progress on that, we will put out more announcements for it. So keep an eye out on the calendar or in the upcoming events channel if you're interested in checking out other systems. We also have the other systems channel where anyone can talk about other gaming systems than D&D that they might want to play. I know DM Grognard has posted a lot about other systems in there as well. He knows a lot of different systems. So that'd be a place to talk about if you want to check out other things that have different kind of themes and gameplay styles and things like that. Finally, the final thing I kind of have listed before we go fully into discussion. This situation is technically still developing. We are waiting to see what the OGL 2.0 will look like after Wizards of the Coast walks back everything that people got upset about. So until then, all we can do is continue to have fun playing the games that we enjoy. Until we get an officially published OGL 2.0, we won't really know anything more. So that is essentially where we're coming from as a server, where we're coming from as, where I'm coming from as a player as well. I, of course, have my own opinions. I've been playing D&D 5th edition for 2 years now, so you can imagine the gut punch this has to someone who's attempted to build an entire community around it and then has something like this happen. But yeah, a lot of stuff happens, a lot of different options available to you should you choose to do so, but you're under no obligation to do so if you don't want to. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. So let me go back over to the chat here, scroll through, and see here. Insane Hiker says, if they're actually concerned about NFTs and blockchain, couldn't they publish an addendum to the OGL? That is a good question, because yes, they could. In fact, I believe there was already an addendum made, which is why the most current edition of the OGL is OGL version 1.0A. However, I did not look into that deeply. I don't know what exactly was changed between 1.0 and 1.0A. Presumably, they could put out a 1.0B if they just wanted to add an addendum that the OGL only covered homebrew content and not NFTs or blockchain. But yes, it seems like a very weird motivation for making a change that allows them to revoke the license at any time and claim anything created under the license for their own purposes. And yeah, that's why their response angered a lot of people even more, because it doesn't make sense. DM Grognard said, D&D Beyond is a sponsor of Critical Role. There's a very good possibility that CR saying anything negative might be a contract violation. Exactly. As an advertiser, it is, I would say with 92.3% certainty that they have some sort of non-disparagement clause, which essentially says, hey, while we're paying you to have an advertising spot, don't talk bad about us. That is very common in many advertising contracts. You can't pay for advertisement space and then have the person say, yeah, they suck, because that kind of defeats the purpose. So it's very probable that they have a non-disparagement clause in their contract with Critical Role. Lego Maniac says, save your vitriol for Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro. CR almost certainly has an NDA on them. They wanted to speak out, they absolutely would have already. Yes. And as I said before, CR did put out a tweet of a pre-written message. It was rather vague. I'll see if I can find it. But yeah, they did voice support for D&D being for everyone in the most vaguest of terms, but they seem to be against the 1.1 changes based on your interpretation of what they said. Recently, I've seen people unsubscribing from their YouTube as well. Critter, do you mean Critical Role's YouTube or D&D's YouTube? This conversation was about Critical Role, so I assume you meant them, but just want to double check. Hate the company, not the game itself. Yeah, that is a big one as well, Spooter. Hate the company, not the game. If the company does something you don't agree with, that's great. But don't hate on the game, and certainly don't hate on the players of the game. One thing that I saw a lot of, which angered me a little bit, was a lot of people disparaging 5th edition players. Specifically, what I saw on Reddit was members of other tabletop gaming systems basically saying, ha ha, you get what you deserve for continuing to play D&D instead of playing my gaming system. And it's like, that's not helpful and rather silly. Now, those were select individuals that did also get downvoted into oblivion, so take it with a grain of salt, but Yeah. Hate the company for making the decision, not the game. And of course, even if you are hating on the company, obligatory, that is no excuse to send death threats to people. That is no excuse to cross the line into endangering people's lives. That is no excuse to make a situation unsafe for anybody involved, no matter how much you disagree with them. They're a company making a decision about the game they own. That is no excuse to threaten people's livelihoods. Jordy B says this is legit J.K. Rowling drama all over again. Basically, yeah, I don't even disagree with that. It's very similar. A lot of the same stuff happening. CK76, kudos to Altroll. Oh, thank you. DM Gardner says you can also certainly not use D&D Beyond. It's currently entirely unnecessary to play the game. Yes, thank you for pointing this out. If you go to our resources tab on server, we do list a lot of different resources to completely play the game without using online resources. Now, we do have online resources there, but if you download a fillable character sheet and you use a third-party virtual tabletop, you can completely circumvent using D&D Beyond in your playing of the game. There's nothing stopping us from not playing 1D&D/5.5/6E/ whatever they call it until they get their heads out of their asses. Exactly. Pull the 4th edition treatment. If 1D&D comes out and they have an OGL 2.0 that people don't like, just keep playing 5th edition. That's what people did with 3.5. And of course, some people went over to Pathfinder, but yeah, there's certainly nothing stopping people from just not playing the newest edition if you don't like it. Why would you play something just because it's new? That doesn't make sense to me. Wouldn't be all without the courses. Oh, thank you. I'd like to see, so Sayaka asks, I'd like to see 3.5e or AD&D lessons. That's certainly something we can look into. I know right now several staff members are still working on that Pathfinder Mastermind. Now, Pathfinder, from what I've heard, is very similar to 3.5. It was based on 3rd edition, but it does have some nuances to it. But yeah, we can certainly look at doing those or AD&D, just kind of getting a little showcase it to see if it's something people would actually like. Because remember, they're entirely different systems. They will have different rules to play them. A lot of the older editions, like 3.5, are a lot what people call crunchier in terms of like numbers, but also somewhat straightforward. They're just different. They're easier in some aspects, harder in others. So it depends. But we'll get masterminds for those to kind of add that context that people might need. When 4E was fouling people's taste to D&D, people just kept playing through it. Exactly. Yeah. Crypt says, I was honestly just really worried about how Altroll and some other servers would be affected. I feel a little better now. Oh yeah. That's why I wanted to put this together, but I waited so long. I was talking to staff about putting this together for Friday, and I think it was Michaela who said like, hey, she sent me the tweet that D&D Beyond put out, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll just wait for them to put out a statement. Maybe I won't need to address anything. And then they didn't put out a statement, and things got worse. And I was like, oh no, okay, we're gonna have to talk about this. So yeah. But yeah, Altroll is not going anywhere. We're not going to stop teaching the courses like we have been, but we might be adding more stuff in there. So at the end of the day, it's kind of a net positive. But all of this is, of course, discussing the future, and the future is always subject to change. Spooter says, it just sounds like they want other people to make products that they can just say, hey, this is ours now, and it rubs me the wrong way. Yeah, it basically does. It is fully a shareholder or an investor or some upper manager looking at Paizo's net income and going, hey, that should be ours, when it was never theirs because they didn't create Pathfinder. So yeah, it's misguided, it's foolish, it's whatever, but yes. Most servers would probably just stick 5e or switch over to Pathfinder Starfront. Yeah. Slaw says, what do you say to those who try to force others to unsubscribe/stop playing D&D? Those people are dicks. Don't listen to them. Yeah, those people suck. If you like playing D&D, you can keep playing D&D. Those people can, get blocked. Because if they're trying to force you to do something you don't want to do, that's not okay. If you're like, hey, I enjoy 5e, but I stand in support of stuff. I have all my books on D&D Beyond. I'm not going to delete my entire D&D Beyond account and no longer be able to play D&D. That's silly. That's a silly request. And I'm not going to get into the whole, ethical consumption under capitalism argument because I don't want to flex my political science degree. But, don't listen to those people. If someone is trying to force you to stop playing 5e, just tell them, I'm having fun. I don't agree with the company, but I'm having fun with 5th edition. So, too bad. Starstruck says, I'm also glad. Very sad this is happening right now when I'm actively getting into D&D. Yeah. This is a really awkward time for a lot of new people, but that's why I said earlier, this will not affect the average player. If you're a new player getting into D&D, while all this drama is upsetting, it doesn't impact you. You don't have to worry about it. If it's too overwhelming, if it's just something that upsets you to a point where you legitimately don't find fun in D&D, you can choose to ignore it. Because, it doesn't affect you. Oh, thank you, Orion, for posting the Critical Role statement that they made. Thank you for finding that on Twitter. Appreciate it. There's the CK76 posted the change.org petition as well. Thank you for posting that. Critter said, unsubbing from Dungeons and Dragons official YouTube. Yeah. Subscription numbers, weirdly enough, are something that matter a lot to big corporations as well. So the D&D YouTube, the D&D Beyond YouTube, I will sidetrack a little bit on that to talk about that because something very early when this happened was discussed by other content creators, and I thought it was interesting. Under the original OGL, Wizards of the Coast was not able to put out enough content to fulfill the demand for people. However, it's apparent that under 5th edition, they are building up their portfolio to be able to fulfill that demand. D&D, the official YouTube channel, and D&D Beyond put out live plays, official D&D live plays of D&D. Are they very popular? I don't know. I don't watch them. I don't look at their numbers. But they are putting out their own live plays. Whereas previously, when the original OGL was put out, they weren't. I don't know if anyone was, but still. So technically, other live plays are direct competition to the official live play that they're doing. If you want to get really technical and bad faith with it for a bit, everything is competition now because they are putting out more addendum books for optional rules. They're putting out live plays to generate content. They're creating podcasts where they talk about D&D stuff on a podcast. They're beginning to build up their own in-house stuff. So now all the out-of-house stuff that's been built up for the last 20 years is drowning out the stuff they're trying to do. So if you were looking at it from a corporate perspective, they're worried about, hey, our official stuff isn't doing well because all these other things are making money off of our IP or our brand. And so that might be a lot of motivation for some of these changes in the mindsets behind them. So in that vein, unsubscribing from the official social media accounts, the YouTubes and whatever, would technically impact the metrics that they are seeing, but also keep in mind with all the D&D stuff, the only thing they cared about were the D&D Beyond subscriptions. They were not tracking book sales. They were not tracking account creation or deletion. They were only tracking subscriptions, which were recurrent payment services. So I think if you want to unsub, if you want to not follow their socials anymore, that's fine. Feel free to do so if you don't want to. But I don't think that's going to have a major effect in the long run when it comes to sticking it to Wizards of the Coast. Critter says D&D is very much still available to play. There's no shame in continuing to support third party or just playing anyways. Yeah, exactly. Yes, American. As Tipiak pointed out, they already kind of support third party creators to sell their homebrew through DM's Guild. And yes, as Critter points out, A lot of the people behind the screen on social media are just customer service. One thing I saw very early on that I did make me feel bad was that Wizards was putting out a lot of their communication through the D&D Beyond team, not through the official D&D team or even the Hasbro social media. D&D Beyond was being used as the buffer for a lot of the hatred. The original tweet came from the D&D Beyond Twitter account. The post on Friday was on the D&D Beyond forums. They are very obviously being used as a buffer right after being newly acquired for less than a year and kind of taking the brunt of a lot of this feedback. American Alex Boy asks, is Hasbro/D&D doing poorly financially, or is this just wanting more money? So, to link back to my earlier statement, it's not that they're doing poor financially, it's that they could be doing better financially. In the shareholder call, they were pointing out how D&D was basically at its biggest point it's ever been. It was popular, Stranger Things had happened, D&D was in the mainstream. And thus, it was popular, they had more users than they had ever had playing D&D, and it's always the most popular tabletop role-playing game system for virtual tabletops across the board. So all those things in mind, a shareholder looked at that and said, why aren't we making more money? It is in my best interest as a shareholder to be making more money if your brand is as big as it is. Which is, again, why I pointed it back to the shareholders being the ones pushing these changes. Or pushing Wizards of the Coast to make these changes, rather. Now, that being said, I don't know Hasbro's financial situation. I don't buy into their stock price or anything like that. I don't even look at all that evaluation. I do think they haven't been doing as great as they have been in the past, if Magic the Gathering is any indication. For those of you who don't know, I don't even know that much, but what I did hear was Wizards tried to do some Magic the Gathering stuff that, like, they re-released a bunch of old cards in $100 boxes, but the boxes wouldn't sell because it was a cheap trick. And they ended up saying that the boxes, quote unquote, sold out when they didn't. They just weren't selling as much as they wanted to. And they ended up like reprinting a bunch of old rare cards, I believe, like Black Lotus and other stuff. That's just what I heard from people who know Magic the Gathering more than I do. But I don't think a company who's doing well would try to do something so blatantly like, hey, we need cash. Personally, I don't know. But I can assume that they're not doing great in terms of corporate growth. Now, as someone who's worked on a corporate level, I will say many shareholders view stagnation or even low growth as failure. A 1% growth in profits from one quarter to the next is failure. They want to see 5%. They want to see 10%. They want to see the line going up no matter what the cost. Now that, again, is speculation of the mindset I think Hasbro might be having in those meetings, but I have no proof that that is or is not what they are thinking. Grogner says, I bet there's going to be a lot of discounted price 5 ebooks showing up on eBay and in thrift stores. Yeah, or maybe even in your local game stores as well. Always support your local game stores for selling D&D books. If you're looking to buy D&D books, always go there if possible. You have an old mall that hasn't shut down yet. There's probably a game store stuck in there. Libraries sometimes have the source books that you can rent out and potentially even purchase. I don't know. I've had some libraries sell D&D books during like library sales where they get rid of old inventory. So yeah, always look for other options to purchase the books. And if you purchase the book physically, you always own it. No one can take that book away from you unless they rob you. And I don't think Wizards of the Coast is going to kick down your door any day soon. TPX says Hasbro as a whole is doing terribly, hence why they're pressuring Wizards of the Coast, which is their main, if not only, cash cow. Yeah, that was kind of my assumption as well. But yeah, Magic and D&D are their main two cash cows right now. I think they technically also own the Transformers brand, maybe, as well as maybe a couple others that I've heard people joking about, but I don't know. Also, keep in mind, you guys might be typing more based on what I'm saying. I'm scrolling down and reading through all these manually, so it might take me a bit. Cool thing about D&D, they can't just turn off the server. We can just keep playing with resources we have. Exactly. Critter says Pathfinder 2e is more similar to 5e. It's a doozy of information to sift through, but we're getting there. Awesome. Yes, Critter is also one of the people leading the charge on that. Appreciate him getting it done. So yeah, keep an eye out for more information there soon. Yeah, they alleged. So Lego Maniac says Hasbro allegedly had a bad year due to the pandemic. Yeah, that makes sense. A lot of companies are kind of doing that now. Equas says, I love being an obstacle between Wizards of the Coast and their money. Yeah, exactly. It's their money. They just don't have it yet, right? But yeah, no. It's your money and you need it now. If any of you remember those commercials from the mid-2000s. Spooter says the worst part about this is it brings attention to D&D, but not in a good way. This is going to scare new players away because they want nothing to do with the drama. They're really hurting themselves here. As a new player, if this was going on when I just found D&D, I'd have turned away real fast. Oh yeah. That's why alt-roll exists. We're here to make it as easy as possible to get into it. And, you know, I was planning on posting this to the YouTube as well for anyone who sees it to just know that, like, yeah, this isn't going to affect, you know, communities like ours. I know a lot of other communities are still doing D&D 5e content. So if you want to get into D&D and learn and enjoy the hobby, you still can. This OGL change, while being bad, is not going to kill the hobby. It's D&D is too big to be killed by something as simple as Wizards and Hasbro messing up a licensing agreement. Mr. B says the giant company accidentally put something in the OGL that lets them steal content. Yeah, exactly. It's not an accident. But then when they say, oh no, it was just a draft, it's so many different parts of it, yeah. Lego Maniac says this is like the BS that Games Workshop has pulled in the past in relation to Warhammer 40k fan material. Oh yeah, immediately I saw comparisons. Like I saw the Simpsons meme where the D&D OGL stuff came out, and then there's the Simpsons meme of Games Workshop, no, and they're like, what? We didn't do anything. Critter responding to Valdor. Why can't they merge with Paizo? I don't think Paizo would be interested in merging at the moment. Yeah. Corporate mergers are very complex things. I don't know a ton about them personally. But they're very complex. I don't think it would be mutually beneficial for either company, especially since Hasbro owns Wizards. So Wizards couldn't merge with Paizo even if Paizo wanted to. I don't know. It'd be very complicated. I don't have all the facts on that. Spooter asks, who is Paizo? Yeah, owner, creator of Pathfinder. They were originally former Wizards employees who, upon the release of the 4th edition in 2008, created Pathfinder, which was based off of 3rd edition / 3.5. They basically said, oh, 4th edition is bad. We'll just make our own system that's a lot like the system people liked, but with some improvements. And they did. And yes, they do also have Starfinder as well, which I believe is a spacefaring version of Pathfinder. But that might be an overgeneralization. I don't play a lot of other TTRPG systems. Scrolling through a lot of these. Critter says, towards the Magic the Gathering thing, $999 bundles for old cards you can't play competitively so that they have no worth on the market, which they allegedly sold out on. Yeah, exactly. They allegedly sold out. Yeah, no, they just certainly weren't selling well. And also, the bundles were still random, so there was no guarantee you'd get the cards you wanted anyways, which was the biggest kicker for me. I never liked the gacha style mechanics of random chance and, oh, you pay in to get something. I want to know what I'm getting if I'm paying for something, or at least the % chance I have of getting what I want. which the EU is very good at establishing into law for video games, but I don't know if they're doing it for tabletop. As mentioned above, they could have solved a lot of their issues by leaving the game alone and just put out secondary products to capitalize on the popularity. That's a good point, Lego, because if Hasbro did want to make more money off D&D, they already are. They have at least one sourcebook coming out every fiscal, or not sourcebook, sorry, module coming out for 5e every fiscal quarter this year. In fact, they have 2 coming out in the fall/winter time. That, on top of the March movie, which is coming out, Honor Among Thieves, that's coming out, which, yeah, box office prices, Hasbro won't make all the money from that, but they still get a big chunk of it. That, on top of the development of 1 D&D, which, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe was set to release in 2024, or was that their D&D Beyond Virtual Tabletop? One of the other was set to release in 2024. I believe it was the tabletop. But even then, D&D Beyond putting out a virtual tabletop that links with your profile and your subscriptions sounds amazing. I'd love that. But again, they messed all it up. So they had stuff brewing. It's just, I guess it wasn't enough for them in the short term. D&D merch would be so popular, I think. Yeah, it would if they put more of it out. Just know that they are, with their fan content policy, they are pretty litigious in protecting it as well, like using the official D&D icon and stuff like that. You have to get a bunch of permissions to do that. So yeah, it's rough. Spooter says, it being a draft makes it so much worse, though. That means they thought even for a moment it was okay to steal content from people. Exactly. Now, the devil's advocate in me will say that might be in there to allow them to market it as, hey, check out the third-party content. And they can use it as marketing material to promote D&D without having to pay to market it. Again, still pretty scummy, but... And there's other stuff that they said, like they included a sentence saying in the apology that, oh, what was it? They wanted to make sure that if they put out future content that was similar to something created under third party, that they wouldn't get sued. Which is just like, I will say, even as someone who's casually seen the homebrew scene, yeah, that happens a lot with people saying, hey, Wizards stole my idea. And it's like, your idea was to have a dragon breathe oil. Like, that's not super far-fetched. And I feel like most people could come up with that. But then they try to sue Wizards for stealing their homebrew idea that they published instead of doing it. Yeah. So I can see that as being a potential reason to need those statements in there. Because people will say, I came up with that first. You can't publish that. And then they try to sue, and just having that in the OGL, this says, hey, no, you can't. I get it. But it doesn't make it good. Doesn't make it acceptable. But I get it. Yeah. I think ultimately, the entire situation is obviously messed up. It's not fair to a lot of people, especially the players. We didn't deserve this. We didn't deserve to start off our 2023 like this. I will just say that now. But just remember, at the end of the day, despite all that's happened, nothing is really changing right now. Alt-Roll's still going to put out courses. We're looking at Pathfinder stuff to kind of explain it. And if you enjoy 5th edition and you're still getting into D&D and you're still looking for your first game, like, don't worry about it. You're good. You're more than good. You're great. Thank you for being here with us. But like, you don't have to worry about it. And if or when OGL 2.0 gets released, obviously we are going to look at it. You know, we'll talk about it either in general, in a thread, or maybe even have another mastermind if it's even more ridiculous than the 1.1 leaks. So we will kind of be here to break this stuff down if you don't have the time or energy to look at it yourself, and that's okay. So yeah, last thing I will say, because American Alex Boy pointed it out on Hasbro and their kind of motivations. I think I mentioned before, Ryan Dancy was one of the people responsible for the creation of the OGL. He stated in one of those interviews over the last week that he left because he saw the change on the horizon in the mindset of the executives. And he kind of saw the writing on the wall and left. That's based on my own memory. I could be misquoting that, but I believe that's the reason he stated that he left. He was kind of like, he did what he needed to do. He saw that things were about to change and like, nope, I'm out of here. And, you know, 4th edition came out and things tried to change. They failed. And then Wizards walked it back for 5th edition. Yeah, it is possible that there are people running Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro, you know, the D&D division, that really don't care about D&D. I saw one person state on Reddit, I believe, that, yeah, odds are these shareholders have never rolled a D20 in their life. They don't know what a D12 is or an attack modifier. They just know that they own stocks in a company, that company makes a product, and that product isn't making as much money as they would want. I'm sorry if I'm the first person to introduce the concepts of shareholding and capitalism to you tonight. Tippy says, okay, it's a bit long, but ponder this. 20% of player base are DMs. Yes, that is according to the shareholders what they purported. That's what they said. There's already a big shortage of DMs. A possibility in the near future is that D&D DMs will move on to other systems, so it might be harder to find D&D DMs. Harder does not equal impossible. That is a possibility as well. I know from what I've read online, the push to switch away from D&D 5th edition has largely been from the players less than DMs. I'm referencing one post that was like, normally it's the DM wanting their players to move to a new system, but all the players want the DM to switch over to Pathfinder now. And it's like, based on that one post, I mean, I want to agree with it, but I don't have any metrics to support or deny that. But yes, it is possible that the shift in player base will affect the amount of available DMs running 5th edition games. And we could take up an entirely different mastermind talking about the DM shortage, because there were some articles that went viral last month, I believe, talking about why does D&D not have enough DMs and why is there a DM shortage, and people talking about paid DMing as the alternative. I think we talked about it in the text chats, but not in an actual mastermind or anything. But yeah, that's not something I would go down that rabbit hole. Trust me, you don't want me diving down there. But overall, I think what Tipiak stated could potentially happen in the short term. I'm interested to see what happens in the long term, because it is also entirely possible that due to the OGL changes, people will switch over to Pathfinder or other systems, try them out, not like them, and come back to D&D. That is also a possibility, because many people might not like the more hardcore aspects of Mork Borg or GURPS. Many people might not like the crunchiness of Pathfinder or 3.5. Many people might like the simplicity and freedom that 5e gives. And they might decide to come back after a month or so and be like, yeah, I actually enjoy 5th edition more. At the very least, now you know what you like. 1D&D is the new... Michaela says, 1D&D is the new 6e. They just don't want to call it that because 5e is doing so well. IMO seems like they wanted to force creators to use it. I don't disagree with that. I do think there's going to be a huge push to get people to use 1D&D. I think the OGL changes are not going to help that. Granted, the switch from 3.5 to 4th edition had its own issues, and the OGL changes in that were just one aspect of the bigger issues that 4th edition had. I think when 1D&D comes out, based on the surveys and the changes they're making and the transparent nature of the playtesting of it, I think 1D&D will be okay. I think 1D&D will just be 5th edition, but clarified with all the clarifications that the additional books like Tasha's and Xanathar's already added. It'll just be a easier to understand 5th edition. That's why they keep saying it'll be compatible, because it uses some 5th edition rules, it uses some optional rules, but says you can use the 5th edition rules. It just gives you all the options. Hey, you can do this, or you can do this. You can take starting equipment, or you can make your own. You can create your own background, or you can use the custom built ones we have listed here. So yeah, I don't think 1D&D will be unpopular when it releases. I just think it depends on all the other stuff around it, because there's only so many straws before you break the camel's back. I mean, I'm trying to think of what I remembered hearing about the transition from 3.5 to 5 from some of the more popular creators, but I think Matt Mercer and Brennan Lee Mulligan talked about their home games stuck with 3.5 well after 5th edition released, and only transitioned like in the last 5 or so years, maybe? I could be wrong on that. It was from a random podcast forever ago that they were on, so I don't even know if that's true, but transition times will depend based on campaigns people are in and how good the new system is. Mr. B says, I played GURPS for 2 to 3 months and I still don't know the rules. Yeah, that's what I hear about GURPS a lot, actually. Hooch similarly says, Mutants and Masterminds played dozens of sessions, still don't know how to play it or build a character in it. Yeah, a lot of other systems are pretty complex, and that's part of the barrier of entry into those, is just like having someone there to explain it to you. I mean, even 5th edition is a relatively easy system to get into, but I mean, we have over 4,600 people in this server specifically to teach you how to play the least crunchy, simplest tabletop role-playing game out there. One of the simplest out there. I don't want to generalize. So like, if a place like Alt-Roll can flourish in a system as simple as 5th edition, I definitely think other systems need more resources to help introduce and teach and make things like that easier. Yeah, Chaotic. This was the weirdest time to jump in because we're basically done we're discussing everything now. So yeah, you really missed the bulk of it, and we're probably finishing up here now. Oh, yeah. We were just talking about kind of other systems that people may or may not switch to, how popular 1D&D might be. Jordy says, thanks, Bill. This has been a bit crazy, so to come and explain it to us really helped. I'm glad this could help. Yeah, it's... When I initially saw it, even I got scared. I was like, oh my god, what's happening? This is terrifying. And I've been doing D&D for only 2 years now. So to be a new player seeing all this happening, I can only imagine. So yeah, glad we could kind of hopefully help put you at ease a little bit, but also clarify like everything that's happening and the potential things that you can do to support or oppose the OGL changes if you oppose them, or just support third-party content creators in some ways. Like I said previously, we are working on masterminds for other systems, specifically Pathfinder currently, but if there is a large amount of interest in other systems, let us know. You know, staff will talk through it. We'll get together different discussion topics and kind of try to summarize everything if you want to try something else out. But our 5th edition content is not going anywhere. We're still going to be teaching and playing 5e for the foreseeable future. Yeah, and if you want more context and content, this would be a good time for me to put out like different videos and resources that I saw that really summarized everything too. Specifically, on YouTube, Sherlock Holmes, who it would stop autoplaying, that'd be great, runs High Rollers. Put out a great video that I'll link here. Essentially summarizing everything that I did, but he does a great job kind of discussing everything. But then he goes into like the entire past 10-minute mark on is fully like his thoughts and feelings on it as a third-party creator, as someone who does live plays, as someone who's been in the industry, and also I believe he said he's written for Wizards of the Coast as well. So that's one that I saw that really summarized everything briefly like we just did, but also like you get other perspectives on it as someone who, you know, is directly affected by OGL changes and someone who can't afford to have all that stuff change. So yeah, I saw that. I definitely appreciated his take on it. I'll see if I can find those Ryan Dancy interviews, but I might not be able to. They're kind of deep in my YouTube history. I've watched way too many videos. Of course, there is the Legal Eagle video. I'll link that here as well. Legal Eagle normally does law content, but kind of did a whole video on kind of the legality of revoking OGL 1.0 and kind of establishes everything from a legal context. So if you're more curious about how Hasbro and Wizards are able to do this, or if they're able to do this, then I think he offers a really good take on it as well. But with that, if there are no further like questions or kind of discussion topics that we want to kind of go through here, we can go ahead and wind down and kind of close up for the evening. If I were to recap everything we've talked about here, just know a couple things. One, 5e is not going anywhere. Two, alt-roll is not going anywhere. And three, if you want to publicly oppose the OGL changes, feel free to do so in whatever way you see fit, whether that is just canceling your D&D Beyond subscription, whether that is deleting your whole account, whether that is leaving D&D forever. Whatever you choose to do is fine for you. Don't allow anybody to pressure you into doing something you don't want to do. If people are trying to shame you into leaving 5th edition or force you into not using D&D Beyond, ignore those people. You don't have to stop using these if they work for you. And if you've already purchased all your books on D&D Beyond, like I have. Exactly. So with that, I will go ahead and let you all go. I'm going to leave the OGL text chat up for a couple days to let you all kind of catch those videos if you want to watch them on your own time. I will do my best to get this recording up in a reasonable amount of time this week. I'll see how busy I am. But I appreciate all of you being here with me tonight. I appreciate all of you contributing to the discussion and having a very healthy, open discussion about this. And I appreciate all of you being willing to sit here and listen to me for almost 2 hours. So thank you. Keep an eye out for more courses this week. We're going to have plenty of 5e courses happening. And I'll see all of you next time. Have a good rest of your night, folks.